All right, Mr. Yoder, thanks for coming on today, sir.
Pleasure. This is great.
So you're teacher turned comedian. How long have you been kind of moving into the comedy lane, and like why that switch?
Yeah, that's so. It's such a. It really is. Even to me, who lives the life, it's fascinating because my whole life was meant. I've wanted to be a teacher. I mean, since sixth grade, I think was the first time when I kind of go back in time when I was like, oh, I wanted to be a teacher. We had this project where it was like you pick names out of a hat or pick jobs out of a hat, and nurse, secretary, whatever. I got third grade teacher, and I really liked my third grade teacher. She was like the first teacher in elementary school that I really connected with, and so I took it very seriously. I remember like taking the book home and like it was a spelling. They were like practicing spelling words, and I created a game about baseball. Like put them into two teams, bought candy to give out as a prize. Like I mean, I like took it so seriously. I
You're
think I always
already well versed in the behaviorist method,
I was
just
so you
reinforcing
know what I
them with
mean, like
chocolate.
totally. I was just, and I went to Catholic school, so
Oh yeah.
that was like that was their only way, But I always said I wanted to become a teacher because I wanted to take away a job from some of the bad ones I had. Like that was so instead of
Okay.
like emulating it good, and I think now I have a different perspective, like almost 20
Mhm.
years in, that like
Yeah.
I feel for those teachers now. Like maybe they just didn't have the resources, or I can see with all the burnout because to kind of answer the second part, the comedy part, when the pandemic hit, I was sort of like lighting myself on fire to keep everybody warm. Like I was the one that everybody was leaning on because I naturally use technology in my lessons, and everybody kind of
Okay.
looked to me after we'd have some new initiative. They'd be like, "I don't understand it," and I'd be the one that would use an analogy or I would use something funny to help them better understand it. And so even
Mhm.
my peers were coming to me. So everybody kind of leaned on me, even administration. They're like, we don't even know how to take attendance in this world. And so I had taken on all these extra roles, and I was
Mhm.
getting no extra pay, no extra
Yeah.
money, and I was just working nonstop. And it
Mhm.
burnt me out, and I needed recess. I needed my own personal recess.
Yeah.
So my wife and I, there was an outdoor comedy club. The guy, to kind of survive during the pandemic, he made an
Yeah.
outdoor,
Yeah.
and we went on Tuesday nights for the open mic because it was our bubble. We had my mom living
Yeah.
with us, so we could socially distance. And after a couple weeks, I kind of looked at her and I said, I think I could do that. And it's been about
So
three
what
years.
made you think like, oh, I could do that? Like, what was like when was it seeing someone bad perform?
So, well, yeah, I think there was that because there were so many people, and some like weren't, because you watch Netflix and you're like, oh, like I can't compete with that,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
you're not realizing that that comedian shot four different shows of that wearing the same outfit, telling the same
Yep.
jokes, and so
I know it's always funny seeing the different crowds. Like when you see like depending on like the
exactly
take,
right,
there's a different people in the crowd there. Yeah.
and you don't think about all of that. And then I'm watching just the day to day, and these comics come every week, and I'm like, why not me? I mean, I was always a ham. I did a lot of acting
Mhm.
growing up, and so I just decided over winter break I got a bunch of comedy books, taught myself, took a master class with Steve Martin. Like, kind of, he did this master class thing, and I just followed it all. I became a student, and then I just kind of right before the new year in 2020, I just got up for 4 minutes and I did like probably what was 10 minutes of material, and I just said it so fast and I got zero laughs. Like there was the one guy's like, it
Oh
probably was funny, but we
no.
couldn't hear what you were saying because you were so the adrenaline. It's like the first day of teaching.
Yes.
You get
Yeah.
that. I don't know about you, but my first day of teaching, I was so nervous. I sweat so much that I erased the overhead projector slide I was creating with the kids. Like we were making a mind map of why you should study a language, and I just erased it by sweating profusely over it. So I think it
Oh
was just
yeah. No, again, one of the things I always talk about was I don't know why I was so scared to start teaching. Like when you get into it, you have this like it's like almost like going through university, you have this image in your mind of okay, like I'm going to deliver the best lecture ever. It's going to be the best lesson. The kids are going to love it. And then it's day one. I wore a beige sweater and like the pit stains I
oh,
had after talking for like 20 minutes. It doesn't help that you're drenching yourself in coffee either. So like your heart's just pumping. You're just like terrified of everything. But yeah,
I had to
it's
bring an
not the
extra
best.
shirt. I brought an extra shirt every day and to like just change at lunch because I knew I was going to need to. Because we used to make fun. I remember I had a teacher in school, Mr. Barlow. He's listening. Shout out to Mr. Barlow. But like we
Yeah.
would make fun because he would have like the stains, and we'd be like, and he would be like making a point and raising his hand. I'm sure he was making a point, but we weren't paying attention anymore. Really.
Yeah. Like
So
this
I,
guy's struggling.
yeah, you're like, oh my goodness. So yeah, the adrenaline was real, but I just kept
Yeah.
going. It was every Tuesday, and I'll tell you what, it helped me at school because it gave me something to look forward to. It's so important to have another passion. I think we as teachers, and when you first get into it, you want to be the best at it, and you can really, you could go all the time trying to reach perfection, and you'll never
Yeah.
get it. But you can, like, there's always something to be done. You can always do more. You can always rearrange
Yeah.
the questions. You can always tweak your lesson plan. But you got to take care of yourself. And I think I didn't learn that lesson, and I spent so much time pouring all my heart into my lessons, and it was great. I'm glad. That's great. But I wasn't doing things for myself. I wasn't chasing a passion that was mine and outside of me as a teacher. And since I've done that, my whole life has changed. My outlook, just everything. The way I wake up in the morning, and I'm not like, oh no, is the lesson perfect? I'm done with that.
Yeah.
I'm done with perfect. And now it's about moderation. It's about boundaries. It's about all the things we in education need that we're not doing for ourselves. And teachers complain all the time about their pay and the stresses. And I think we just have to take a little ownership. We can't change the system in a night, but we can change. I can change not looking at my email after I leave for that day. I can do that, and then I can set those boundaries, which I hope teachers are doing now.
Yeah, like I can play Animal Crossing at 7:30 rather than rather than
Right.
check my email. Yeah, my
Yeah.
wife got me for that for Christmas, and it was like all I did over the break. It was the whole thing. But so now that you've kind of like gotten into a different type of passion here, what is comedy giving you that teaching could?
I think what I like about it is I'm in complete control of the content. I'm in complete control of how I deliver it, when I do it. Like, you're your own boss in a
Mhm.
sense. And it's really yours. There is no one to answer to. And so the only thing that matters is if people laugh or if I have the opportunity to keep doing it. And, you're getting that every 10 seconds, you're getting that feedback that we don't get from kids. I mean, we can have a huge impact on a kid's life, and you could never know it in teaching. Like, you
Mhm.
could never know it. You could go years later in that I had a student come up to me. We were out for dinner a couple months ago, out like a steakhouse, and all of a sudden the kid walks up to me and my family, and he's like, "Hey, you were my teacher." And I looked at him, and it must have been like 15 years ago. And I
Yep.
knew as soon as knew him, I couldn't place his name. He's like, "I just want to let you know, I think about you every day. I have my own landscaping business, and I speak Spanish all the time with, and he's like, I'm just so grateful. I just wanted to let you know." And I was like, this was a kid who wasn't in class a ton because he was a professional motocross guy. Like, he was really getting
Yep.
into getting
Okay. Yeah.
sponsorship. So he'd be there, but he'd have to, and he was diligent about trying to keep up and do his work. And that's what I remembered about him. I was like, I can't remember your name right now, but I knew, did you do motocross? And he's like, yes. And so it's like one of those things that in the moment when he was in my classroom, like I'm sure we interacted well and did well, but I didn't leave there with a sense like I do when I'm having a comedy show and I'm hearing laughter every 15 seconds. So I think comedy gives me that. Comedy also gives me an outlet to show who I am. I think sometimes we as teachers, like, we don't bring ourselves into the classroom. Either we think that we're not supposed to, or we don't want it to get in the way of the curriculum. Um, but or there's certain things about our lives we want to keep to ourselves and keep personal. I have
Mhm.
certain things about my family and the way I was raised. I mean, I was raised by gay mothers. I had two moms, and it turns out
Mhm.
my dad was gay too, and didn't find out till later in life. And so, like, I have a hard time talking when I talk about my other mom. I just say as a mom collective because I don't want to lose the lesson.
Okay.
So, like,
Yeah.
sometimes I have to like mask stuff. Or if I talk about my dad, he lives in Spain with his husband. I don't
Mhm.
mention that he's married to a guy, but I mention that he lives in Spain because
Mm.
again, I can't share that. But on stage, I'll tell all the jokes about all of it, and
Yeah.
so there's certain things that I have to hide sometimes. I feel in a way that I just don't want to derail the lesson. But comedy gives me
Yeah.
ultimate freedom to be myself, express myself, and I think that's what we all need. We all need an outlet to express
Mhm. Oh,
ourselves.
absolutely. And so is your comedy, you would say, mostly related to education, or you kinda, like, branch out a
Oh,
little
actually,
bit?
I did it to get away from education. So when I first started, I didn't want to talk about anything with school. I wanted to talk
Okay.
about I wanted to talk about being raised by moms in the area where you
Yeah.
could never tell anybody you were gay. Like, I don't know what it's like in Vancouver, but
Yeah.
in 80s Scranton where I grew up, like it was an old coal
Yeah.
mining town. Like you don't talk about we don't talk about Bruno. Like, you don't talk about
Yeah.
those things. And so it felt like living in witness protection for most of it. So I like to explore some of that and like talk about that. And
Yeah.
it's great. I love going into areas now like that. Like
Mhm.
I did a gig a couple nights ago in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, and that stuff hit hard because I think people are now more willing. They just don't understand. They don't know. You know
Mhm.
what you don't know, you fear. And so if you can find
Yeah.
a way to build tension and release it, uh,
Mhm.
then I love doing that. So I talk about that. I talk about parenting because that's another thing. Like there's no
Yeah.
manual for parenting, and
No.
even if there were, it's going to be outdated. So it's like,
Mhm.
so just the stumbling through the Homer Simpsoning my way through parenting, where I want to do a
Yeah.
good job, but I don't have a typical stencil.
No?
I
What does it
wasn't
mean to be
raised.
a good parent? I have no idea.
Yeah, and so you can tell the heart's in it. So it's fun to like
Yeah.
have play with that. I also have a
Mhm.
special needs daughter. My oldest is autistic, and I
Mhm.
love that because that's another thing or even for ourselves. I didn't know what that meant when she was born, and it took me a
Mhm.
while to kind of process those feelings. And now I love talking about it because it's either I get tons of families that come up to me after the show and they're like, I needed to laugh about that. Thank you. I have a son who's autistic. I have a
Yeah.
daughter
Well, you're
who's autistic.
resonating and you're not making fun of it, like, you're not making
She's
light of it
always the
either. You're
hero. Yeah, she's
trying.
always the hero
Yeah.
in the joke.
Yeah.
That's
Yes,
the other
exactly.
piece. Like when you
Yeah.
tell a joke, you have to pay attention to who has the power of the joke. It's like
Yeah.
who's got the power, and you always want her to win, and me to be the bumbling idiot, or
Yeah.
the world in general not understanding. It's fun. I mean, like
Yeah.
for me, that's because then you have people who don't really know what autism is, and now all of a
Mhm.
sudden they're getting a different angle on it.
Yeah.
And oh, they like to play with trains, or oh, they might not speak, or
Yeah.
you're trying to break some of those stereotypes.
Well, and honestly, like, when it comes to I don't know how much you're willing to talk about this, because even for myself, when it comes to autism, like, my wife teaches kindergarten, so let's just say, "Oh, like, I have 3 autistic kids in my class," and I'm like, I have no idea what to do with that. Like, not like meaning if I was in that scenario,
Yeah,
like, how do you actually, like, what is like, what have you learned about
yeah.
autism? Like,
So
kind of,
that's
and how to
such a
address it,
good
or, like.
question. Such a because, and
Yeah.
that's the other thing is like because they always say you hear the word spectrum, right? Because it is
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
there's the saying, one autistic kid, you only know one autistic kid. So
Yeah.
it's really neurological. So there's like the way
Yeah.
that her brain is wired, certain things like sound, sights, tastes, things that we could either disregard or like, oh, I can hear them like playing upstairs, but I can tune that out and still have a conversation with you. She'll
Mhm.
get hyper focused on that. Or
Yeah.
something that we don't even really sense, the temperature change, the anything. She could, it might send her to that's
Yeah.
all she can feel or focus
Mhm.
on. And so having to figure out what's triggering her could
Mhm.
be challenging because she didn't talk till she was 5. And a lot
Okay,
of
yeah.
that was she was just too busy taking it all in. Because when you're
Mhm.
speaking, just like anything, you're no longer bringing in. You're now like kind of it's a reflective process. And so for her, she was too busy being Neo in the Matrix. I don't know if you saw the movie The Matrix, but he's in the chair taking in all that information, and that's how
Yeah,
she
yeah.
was experiencing life. She was like Neo in the chair, and everything we didn't know because she wasn't putting anything out, but she taught herself to read it too. And we had no idea until we had a poster of these like U.S. presidents. So my wife brought all these like put all over the playroom stuff from her elementary teaching career because she's also a teacher.
Mhm.
And we had a poster, and she was obsessed with the president poster. And if you said a president, she would immediately point to it at like 2.5. And
Okay,
and
interesting
then
you
what
say
we
that, yeah.
realized, if you said John and there were like 5 presidents with the name John, if she didn't
Yeah.
wait because of her ADD, if she didn't wait to hear the last name, she might misfire. She'd point to a John, but John Adams instead of John F. Kennedy.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
And so then we were realizing, like, oh, okay, like she's reading. It's not. At first, I'm like, how does she just memorize? Like, is she just like a savant? And
Mhm.
my mom, who lives with us, had the captions on her TV nonstop, and she was always in the room with her. So I think she just taught herself how to read by reading the captions on my mom's television,
Hmm.
and just that influx of sounds and whatever for her was it. And then she didn't potty
Yeah.
train till she was almost 6 because she was too
Mhm.
busy doing everything else.
Well, yeah,
That
like,
didn't reach.
you're going through the world in a different way. Like, that's
Yeah,
not, like, necessarily to be a bad way or, like, whatever, it's just it's a different way, and it's different, I guess, expectations maybe is the wrong word
yeah.
of just, like,
Well,
the
and everything takes a little longer. Like everything,
yeah.
because you have to train her to think about it and to
Mhm.
desensitize. You know, she has to be exposed to something over and over again until
Mhm.
she's seen it all, and now
Yeah.
she can kind of really figure out where she is in space and time. We notice when
Mhm.
she's in water, because
Okay.
kids often like weighted blankets and pressure.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
because her vestibular system, the system that kind of keeps her within the, moving around, she was like always moving around. They tend to be the
Mhm.
kids that touch and bang into stuff and have to go around and touch everything. Um, but when she was in water, it was pressing her, and now she didn't have to guess where she was in space and time. It was like
Mm.
anchoring her, and then we noticed
Yeah.
she'd start babbling and talking more because she was in a state of
Like,
rest. She
in
wasn't.
water?
Yeah, because it was like.
Whoa,
So then
interesting.
all of a sudden she was like, she felt anchored, because otherwise she was so busy trying to imagine if like a pilot actually had to fly every second of that commercial
Yeah,
flight instead of hitting
yeah,
autopilot. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
every little bump, it's like, Han Solo in Star Wars having to go through an asteroid field. Like she's
yeah,
experiencing life with such pressure to try to figure out how to
yeah.
navigate. And now all of a sudden, once she experiences it enough, it desensitizes. But it's funny. I mean, I have a joke that I tell in my act where I'm like, it's like, oh, people punch down on autism, but I think they're jealous because she sees the world in a state they take drugs to visit. And I'm like, they call it a trip. She's a permanent resident. So it's like going through some of those things. And I'm like, but now she's got dual citizenship because all the therapies are working. And that's really what it is. It's her like kind of like desensitizing this stuff. So I love that.
Yeah,
I love talking. And then, she has no filter. So if like, something strikes her like in the morning, she wakes up, Dad, I want waffles. And she just starts
like
yelling at the top of her lungs that she wants waffles. And you're like, take it down a
hell
notch.
yeah.
I love waffles too. Like, um,
That's suitable energy for waffles, so
yeah. And she wasn't like interacting with people at first. So we were worried about that. Now she'll go up to anybody and she'll be like, hey girl, what are you doing? And the girl will be like, what are you doing? Like,
what do
so
you
now you got to like teach her like social
Yeah,
norms, things that you and
yeah,
I could learn
yeah,
just by watching others.
yeah,
She has to be taught. So, but then there's things
mhm,
like reading and all these other like technology. She just
yeah,
intuitively knows how to do. So it's funny because my
mhm,
youngest is neurotypical, and it's
mhm.
like Anna and Elsa from Frozen. So like we had to teach my younger one how to read. We're like, I don't even know how to teach a child to read because Alicia just taught herself. We didn't have
Yeah,
to teach her how to potty train. We didn't have to teach her how to speak.
yeah,
We won't have to teach her how to make friends, but we have to teach her how to do math. We have to teach her how to read. So it's just interesting. It's like when you build a character in a game, you get so much attributes that you can spread out, and they were
yeah,
just spread out differently. Certain things for her were at the max, and other things were almost at zero. Um, and so it's our job as the parents, and it's our job to put her in an environment where everybody's allowing her, like your wife's going through, trying to figure
yeah,
out like, you know, what's triggering that kid. And there's a
mhm,
reason. So as long as we're realizing there's a reason, you can figure it out. Oh, the lights are bothering them, or oh, there's too much
yeah,
noise, or oh, the schedule is too erratic and they don't know what to expect, so they're always
Yeah.
at high alert. So we
Like
just we just have to learn.
you're trying to wane down that like sensory surprise for them is kind of somewhat what I've learned a little bit. Because I remember like I worked for like our local autism society here once, and it's only like a short span in like the summer one year. I was doing university full time through the spring and summer as well, so I didn't end up working as many days as I was originally going to. But anyway, I remember we did like the non-violent intervention kind of thing. Like
Mm.
when anyway, and we did an activity to start off, and it said, "Okay, you are a 4-year-old nonverbal. Can you please communicate to the group that you want to, in 30 minutes, go to McDonald's and that you want a 6-piece nugget meal or a Happy Meal?" And I was like to do that without saying anything, I was like, whoa. But that was like that immediate kind of twist where I was like, okay. And I guess it's maybe taking the perspective, but trying to enact it out, I was like going like this with nuggets and like Happy Meal, smiling like crazy. But it was just, yeah, to try to explain that and understand that that's the level of like hyper activity that they are kind of involved in. See, and maybe I'm wrong, but that's kind of what
That's a
stuck out
beautiful
to me
exercise.
there. But
What
yeah,
a great exercise. Yeah,
yeah,
I think because
yeah.
that's when I think about what life was like with her
Mhm.
before for the first 5 years. I mean, man, was it a challenge to figure out what she wanted, especially when she was real young, like 4, and that eventually they could either like take you over to something, she would drag you over
Yep.
to it, or the thing that got her to start speaking. We use a lot of what they're called AAC devices, augmented like communication devices
Yep.
for kids who can't speak. So they got what was called a PEX board, which is a picture exchange communication system, is the acronym. And it was like a little book with all these Velcro tabs in it of things and activities and foods and whatnot. And
Mhm.
then it had a strap for her to carry. And then she would take out the ones and put on the front what she wanted. So whenever she had a therapy session, and they would try to create the schedule, and she'd like, what things do you want to do? Let's pick a couple activities to do. And so once she realized that, and she's like, "Oh, this is so laborious. I'll just start talking to you." So like as soon as she was given like something like that, she's like, "Oh, you want me to do
Yeah.
all this? All right, I'll just start talking.
It's
It's
like,
fine."
I'll just yeah, this is
Yeah,
what I
it's like,
want.
but some kids that doesn't happen, or
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes kids are just completely nonverbal. We met some families through because we tried to join as many groups, like, and she's in
Mhm.
special needs baseball, special needs cheerleading, like she's in some mainstream stuff like Girl Scouts, but we
Mhm.
met other families that also have kids who are autistic, and that was huge for us. Like until we
Mhm.
started doing that, I don't think I really felt comfortable until I saw other people. You could talk to an expert, and that's fine. But when you talk to
Yeah.
another person that's on the front lines, and then I mean, dinner time was like the first 4 years of her life. Dinner time was like going to war. It's like at the end of your day, you did all of this stuff at school.
Yeah,
Now you're trying to sit down and have a meal, and
yeah.
you had to like nothing would work. She wouldn't eat anything. We had to do food therapy. We sent her to food therapy. They'd have you bring in a bag of something non-preferred. They'd take her in
Mhm.
the back for a half hour, and then they'd come back and be like, "Yeah, she ate it all." What sorcery are you doing back there? Because I have no. And so, like, what they were doing is they were having her choose activities she'd like to do. They would do
Mhm.
them, and then and then if she wanted to continue doing them, she had to do something. They would start with like, you have to touch the food, you had to kiss the food, you had to take a mouse bite, you had to take a horse bite,
Hmm.
and I was trying to work a joke with this in my bit that it ended up being a little too risque, but it wasn't too bad, but it was just like, I'm like, what are you guys doing back there? She's like, well, we just start with some light touching and kissing. I'm like, what is going on back there? And are you taking new clients? Because I'm struggling too. Uh, it's like, but like that's what they were, because they let me, because if I go back there, it
Mhm.
it destroys it. So I
Yes.
get why I couldn't be back
Which
there.
is also kinda crazy that, like,
Yeah.
the presence of maybe, like a familiarity, it's like if you can't change in a familiar place, right?
So
Like, you
yeah.
need, like, a
So
new context to kind of
they started
grow, I
recording the
guess.
sessions, and then
Yeah.
I could see like how they were prompting her, because that's what I have to do. Whatever experts are, I have to mimic, and I learn a lot from my wife,
Yeah.
because my wife, for her, it's like she's like almost effortless with a lot
Yeah.
of it. Although,
Mhm.
we're coming into new terrain because she's 10, but she's starting to get to an area where we're going to be worried about preteen stuff soon. And,
Yeah.
even my wife was like, we don't know, it's going to be new territory for all of us.
Mhm.
Yeah, but my wife was really good with it too. So we would just mimic what they were doing. And then eventually, now she's able, she helps us make the meal. She wants it cut in fours or, whatever the thing is. We're trying to get her to start taking more ownership over
Mhm.
making things she can make. Toast with butter on it. You're 10, almost
And how
11.
was and sorry, you're based out of New York, right?
So I'm in like Philadelphia, but I'm not too
So
far. I'm
okay,
about 2 hours
yeah.
from New York.
So it kind of in where, like, you have been with your family and, like, especially with your daughter's programming, has she kind of been in, like, a, like, neurotypical classroom throughout her
Yes.
entire, like,
Oh
elementary thing?
yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we were very
Yeah.
big into wanting her mainstream and
Mhm.
everything possible, just because that's what
Mhm.
the world she lives in. So
Yes.
the
Yeah.
daycare and preschool stuff, because you're not able to do like we were able to get her in programming as young as 3. So she was
Okay.
able to go to some sort of schooling or things, even if it was only 2.5 hours,
Mhm.
as young as 3.
So if you
Um,
don't mind me asking, like, what was the like, how old was she with the original autism
we started
diagnosis?
as 18 months. We started therapies. We
Okay. So how like, what
And
way do
that's
you
not
kind of go into
typical. That's
therapies?
not typical for girls.
Yeah.
Girls go undiagnosed often till later in life. And there's plenty
Mhm.
of reasons. Sometimes the symptoms manifest differently, and most of
Mhm.
the research has always been in boys. Girls are
Yeah.
really good at doing something called masking or camouflaging, where
Mhm.
they can kind of like, oh, they're just quiet,
Mhm.
or their interests might not be out of whack. Like for boys, sometimes the interests are like really out of what would be normal for a boy, but for girls, it's not. Like my daughter, she's really into reading, obsessed.
Mhm.
I mean, like
Mhm.
can't leave the house with less than 3 books in her hand, or
Yeah.
so like but for them it's the intensity of the obsession and so some of the testing
Yeah.
that's done doesn't hit that. It hits that it's something really weird, and they're like, oh, she's really obsessed with the cat. Oh, people like pets, but people, it's about the intensity. So some of the tests they
Mhm.
think are biased towards uh things for males. Like I said, girls can mask it better
Yeah.
sometimes, but when you mask it and camouflage it, there's an equal and opposite reaction after. Like those girls tend to come home after school, they isolate, they show bigger signs of depression, suicidal thoughts, because
Mhm.
they're having to hide who they are all day. And it's like a teapot with no spout that's sitting on
Yeah.
full blast all day.
Mhm.
There's a movie
What yeah.
I was going to say with Ben Affleck called The
Yeah, go ahead.
Accountant.
Yeah.
Have you
Okay.
heard of this movie?
No. I've heard of it, I've never seen it though.
So he's autistic in it, and if you watch some of the scenes, there's some like when he's all day as an accountant, and then he gets home and he has this ritual he has to do to kind of like decompress
Mhm.
from the day, so so that he can kind of get back to it the next. So, but yeah,
Okay.
so we had to your original question. 18 months we started having people come in for like play therapy, speech, motor, OT. Like, I mean, because she wasn't crawling normally, she was like butt scooting herself around,
Okay, yeah.
So there were just things like that we had there. But my wife, it was all because my wife noticed she was tiptoeing. When we were
Oh,
calling
yeah, yeah.
her name, she wouldn't respond, so we had to get her hearing tested. But the minute you said something she was interested in, her favorite TV show, she you could whisper it, and she from 2 rooms away, and she
Yeah.
would like.
Yeah.
So there were just certain things we were noticing. Once she got older and we were with other families that had kids, no desire to go anywhere near them. One in the corner,
Mhm.
did her own thing. So those were
Well,
some
yeah,
of the.
the reason I ask is because, like, I can understand and obviously I empathize with a lot of parents, but I feel like you were very, like, aware of kind of seeing, like, how she was doing, but one of the main things I've talked to is I have a few friends who are also, like, elementary teachers and, like, kindergarten and preschool teachers, and one of the main things they say is, like, whenever they kind of recommend that process for parents to get into, try to get some additional programming, there's always a lot of resistance, which is fair
Mhm.
because like, you don't wanna just be, like, told, like, your kid has a diagnosis of some sort, but how would you kind of guide parents through that process of, like, even just getting the testing, 'cause I know it's a very touchy
Yeah.
subject, and,
I
like, you
I
never wanna
well,
be like
yeah. You want the best for
yeah.
your kid. I think at the end of the
Yes.
day, but, like, I remember walking in when we finally, because the first IEP, the first, document we had where she was gonna have something put on paper was
Mhm,
right when she was gonna enter school, so it was, like, maybe 5 years old, and this was after
mhm.
she had already been in therapies forever. Um, but they had autism on there, and I was like, "Oh, you guys made a mistake." I was very resistant, even though for like 3 years
Yeah.
I knew there was something up.
Mhm.
Having a label or having it on paper, like
Yeah.
we have this story. I mean, everybody tells you have kids and you have an idea of what the future looks like and what it is for when you have a kid,
Yeah.
and to have that shattered, no, that's a hard thing. Like
Mhm.
it's like almost like it's like heartbreaking. It's like pulling a 3-year-old and trying to tell him Santa's not real. Like you want him to have a few more years before you have
Yeah. Sorry, I mean
to do that. Well, no,
yeah.
it's meant to, Jay. But like that's what it is. And so I think that was that same feeling, and it was just like, oh, what does this mean? Like
Yeah.
now all of a sudden everything's changed and it's
It's a lot of
different.
uncertainty, absolutely,
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's so you're so fearful, and you're like, what did I do? Well, I remember I coached baseball, and we all the baseball coaches we had like a holiday party, and so we were at one of the coaches' houses. They all have like, a couple that had kids around her age. She was like 4 at the time, still wasn't talking, and wasn't playing with them. And I watched my friend's daughter coming up, like talking to everybody, like taking cookies and like joking around and playing with her toys. And I watched Alicia just in the corner by herself, and like for 3 hours. And I remember leaving the party, and my wife and I were driving home, and I was just crying. I was just like, "What happened? Like, what's wrong? Why?" And I was just so upset. Like, I'll never forget that night. And it was just because, like, all of a sudden, my vision for what it was to be a dad was broken. It wasn't the fairy tale that I thought it was going to be, and that takes time to get over. So, and some people I think just have a hard time with that. Maybe they just want to believe
Mhm.
that maybe Santa's still real. Maybe,
Yeah.
he just, so I think that's that mentality. And that's so hard for people to come to grips with. And until they're around other people and they understand what it's like, and that's what's hard because people who have kids with autism, they tend to hide. They like a perfect example. My daughter's kindergarten teacher, we were button heads. She was like having these stations, and it was making Alicia all crazy. And we were
Yep.
constantly going back and forth in email. And I finally said, "Can we just sit down and have like I teach in the same district? I'm not in the same building, but
Yeah.
like, let's just meet." So I came over, sat in the tiny chair, which at my size is a feat, and like we're
I
just
love the tiny chairs.
and she's like, and like at one point I'm expressing my concerns, and she's like, listen, she's like, this isn't my first rodeo. And I said, well, listen, this is my first rodeo. And so like we had this moment, and then I was like talking to her about all the things we're trying to do with Alicia and take her out, um and she looked at me and she's like, my son's autistic, and she's like, I always sheltered him, we never went out. And then she looked up and she's like, I've never said that out loud before. And we had this moment where she like had, she was
Yeah.
basically, because she had a kid with autism, she was putting on Alicia the hard nosed thing she was trying to do to her own son, who was 21 at the time. So this was 2 decades
Yeah,
ago
yeah.
that she was. So what I've noticed is the teachers that Alicia's had that she's had the hardest time with are people who have connections with kids with autism. Her preschool teacher, she was having a hard time with, and that woman, her daughter had a kid with autism, and then the daughter wasn't capable of raising her, so she turns out raised her autistic granddaughter, but she was like hard on her, and that's how she was with
Mhm.
Alicia. And I think it was good. I
Okay.
think for a degree it
Mhm.
was good because the world's not going to do her any favors. So
Yeah.
if she can get a little taste of that, that's
Mhm.
good. But that's what I realized. All these families, you try to give them. It's like a balance. Like you're like, oh, I want to cushion her, but at the same time, she's going to go out there. Like when she goes to the bathroom at a restaurant, I get nervous she's going to walk out with her pants down because she'll forget. She'll be so focused on getting back to the table, she'll forget to pull her
Mhm.
pants. like
Yeah.
silly stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
That like now I have to let it go. I have to let her go. I have to let her, have those moments. I have to do all of that, and it's such a it's such a roller coaster ride. I can understand the parents that are just resistant because if they buy in, then then they really now have a whole new world that they might not be ready to undertake. So I feel
Mhm.
for them. That's what I
But yeah,
hope.
especially, like, being in teaching and in comedy with yourself, like, you have such a control over everything. Like,
Yeah.
trying to learn to let go can definitely be a huge challenge, but yeah, I appreciate you sharing your story there. That's actually very valuable because I don't have any kids yet myself, but, like, who knows what the
Yeah, and
next
and you
10 years will kinda hold, but
yeah, and I'll tell you what, I wouldn't change it. If you said to me and you came by, listen, like you could. If somebody said to me, you could like, hey, if we could reset this, like if you just did this, we'll reset it, and she'll come out neurotypical. I wouldn't take it. I'd say no dice,
Mhm,
because I wouldn't be where I am right now. I wouldn't know,
mhm,
and I'll be honest. I love her. She's just so funny. She's like to me.
mhm,
I love having her in my life every day. She wakes
mhm,
up with such joy in her heart that I don't think the average people have. And she's so loving, and my mom lives with us, and she's so cute with my mom. They're like two little
mhm.
things. She's like, Grandma, I'm so glad you're home. Or like anytime she gets a present, she's like, this is the best present. Like she just because she's mimicking these things, and she's mimicking joy, and it's just
Yeah,
beautiful. Like so, I
yeah,
wouldn't change it for as hard as it is, as hard as middle school's going to be. Like I
yeah,
don't know what the future's going to look like for her. Will she
mhm,
hold a regular job? Will she have a family? I don't know.
mhm,
This is the time where we give her independence, so we find out where her
mhm,
ceiling is. And that's hard sometimes because even my mom, we've had to talk with her where she's like doing too much for her, and I'm like, listen, it's like feeding a wild animal. Like you can't do that because we need to see what she's capable of on her own.
mhm.
So that like when it comes time, because schooling, I don't know what it's like in Canada, but here it can be up to 21. As soon as they turn 21, all services
Yeah,
get cut, and then you kind of move into like adult services.
mhm.
Um, and so we need to
Yeah,
do
yeah,
as much as we can in the next 11 years
mhm,
to sort of see, is she going to be with us for the rest of her life? What's that going to look like?
mhm, yeah.
But
Yeah, I know up here in Canada, I think it's up to 20, like, you get 2 years post high school, but that you can still I think now because, like, a lot of the high schools are becoming a bit more inflated with population, like, they're starting to try to phase out a little sooner to try to make or, like, point
if
you
they
toward, like, a
can, yeah,
community
absolutely.
college to do
Get into
that,
the
that kinda thing,
workforce,
but
yeah. Well, there's so
yeah.
much. It was funny. The show I did 2 nights ago in the middle of nowhere. I was talking.
Mhm,
I usually end my last 10 or 15 minutes of my set about her. And
mhm.
a woman came up to me after when I was like standing by the door saying goodbye. She's like, "Do you really have a daughter with autism?" I'm like, "You think I made all of? You think I would make all of that up?" Like, but she said that to say that she actually works for the state, and she works
Mm.
with with 21 plus. So
Oh,
as soon as
okay.
the services end, that's where she steps in with
Mhm.
either like job coaching or services for whether it be like a assisted living home once their parents might pass away or
Yeah, yeah.
age out. So it's like we were talking and she was just affirming that everything we had been doing is what we should be doing. And,
Oh, that's nice though. Like,
yeah,
you're
which is
kinda just
great.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so again, I get to have these. I've had so many I've met so many other. It's like it's almost like it's so cool. Like I've had autistic kids come up to me after and they're like, "Oh, I'm autistic. I was just like your daughter when I was her age, and I just graduated college, and now I work for the county in the office, of voter services." Or and so I see her having a job. I see
Yeah.
her doing
Yeah,
something.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
I see that for her. We have a family that we're really close with, and he didn't speak until he was almost 6. So Alicia started speaking, and then it almost put a riff in our friendship for a little bit because then Alicia, we
Mhm,
both had nonverbal kids, and then Alicia started talking, and Zach hadn't. And then all of a sudden, Zach started talking, and now he's talking up a storm too. And so, like, her and I, we just had breakfast the other morning together. We make it a point to stay together because it's just helpful having another family. And so, the people who learn that they have a kid who's autistic, just know you're not alone and find those
mhm,
other families because they're out there. There's organizations, there's programming. It's
mhm,
just you gotta dig for it and you gotta be persistent. That's the other thing is like Got to
Yeah.
be super persistent. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. Um, but there's so much out there. We didn't even realize. And if there's not out there, you can start it. Like
Yeah, that's true.
we
Yeah.
started a baseball league. We have Little League Baseball has what they call the Challenger Division, and it's for kids with all special needs. But she couldn't play
Mhm.
baseball on a regular team, but she's got really good hand-eye coordination. Like I pitched to her, like I'm not throwing it in there like Honus Wagner, but like I'm pitching. Like, and she's got good hand-eye. She likes to play. She also likes to play in the dirt. But
Mhm.
they each have a buddy who kind of protects them in case they're having a moment or whatever, and that
Yeah.
way the parents get to just be parents. Like the goal of those programs is to have enough volunteers to run around the field and help the kids if they're
Yes.
running,
Yeah.
so the parents can just be parents and be in the stands and enjoy themselves. And
Yeah,
there's
because I
a
know,
lot.
like, we have, like a basketball, like a hoops academy thing here
Yes.
locally, it's great. And
Yep.
so, trying to shift gears, like, a little bit here, when
Yep.
I saw one of the reels that you were talking about when you were you're telling your, imposter syndrome story
Oh yes.
of when so if you would you mind sharing that again here a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's the thing about teaching too. Is there's this thing that we're supposed to be the sage on the stage. Was
Yeah.
this one room classroom where you were the expert in
Mhm.
town, and
Yeah.
education's so slow to move that even 100 and some years later, I feel like sometimes that happens, and you can't know all the things. You can't.
No.
And so I had an issue where when I was student teaching, and I'm certified in Spanish and Latin. Those were the two things that I was doing at the time. And
Mhm.
I had a kid who was in Latin 3, Kyle, asked me to help him with his homework. And I didn't know how to answer it. I hadn't been teaching that class yet. I was doing like the lower levels. And I didn't know how to answer it. I didn't even know what he was talking about. And I was like, it hit me in such a way that I lost it. I had to like go, like I covered in the moment with him, but then like I left and just
Yeah.
walked around the building, and my co-op had to like talk me down and like walk me through. And um, I
So
think
what do
I
you mean
had
by
all
hit you?
what's that like how it
What do
hit
you mean
me.
by hit you? Like, what do you mean, like it hit like a was it
It hit me like
like a
it hit me like
sadness
a
or
thing.
like
Like it was like a physical feeling of like I'm a failure. What am I doing? I shouldn't be doing
Mhm.
it. How did I get this far? How did I trick everybody into thinking I could be a teacher? How did I pass the test? How did I? Because if I couldn't answer this one question, then it
Mhm.
was this all or nothing sentiment
Yeah.
that I had, and I don't know why, but like I was just I just had this feeling. It was so early on, but even still, even as I taught, like I'm like, oh, I didn't grow up in a family that spoke Spanish, or I didn't. I studied in Argentina, I
Mhm.
studied in Spain, I graduated top of my class, and there were
Mhm.
kids who grew up speaking Spanish. So it's like
Mhm.
it's so not a real thing, but we just get in our heads, I think, sometimes,
Yeah.
and we just think we're not enough. Because like I
Mhm.
said earlier, there's always more you could do. There's always more you could tweak, and if you let that like eat you up and consume you, and if you don't tell yourself, if you don't value yourself, and if you don't talk nice to yourself, I don't talk nice to myself. Like, I don't know. I think a lot of people are like that. You make a
Yeah, what's
wrong
that like?
turn. Yeah, like you make a wrong turn. Yeah, you make a wrong turn. You're like, you idiot. Like, and I'm like yelling at myself in the car, and I'm like, and
Yeah.
I think that when we don't treat ourselves kindly, and
Mhm.
I don't know what that comes from. I don't know if that's just the age of like the yelling fathers and the yelling parents and the yelling. I
Mhm.
didn't have that growing up, but like I remember watching it on TV and seeing that. Though we have a movie here, The Christmas Story, that plays 24 hours on Christmas, always there, and
Mhm.
the dad in that's always yelling and cursing, and the kids are always like, there's a sentiment that like there's a comic I know that has a joke that he thought his name was Jesus Christ because every time his dad be like, Jesus Christ, what are you doing? Um, and it's like this concept of that we're not good enough, and I just
Yeah.
there's just so much in education. That's not our job. Like John Dewey, who's
Yeah.
someone that if you study education, you often read his philosophies, and he's like, that's not our job. Our job was never to be the the guy who knows it all. We're the
Yeah.
manager and the facilitator, because now there's this influx of information out there, and
Yeah.
they need someone from their community that they trust
Mhm.
and has the values that they have, and because that's what schooling systems are really set up to be. We're trying to prepare people to take over for the community and the world, and we need to help them kind of digest what's useful. So I don't have to pretend that I know the right answer. Like there's teachers I'm sure when if a kid tried to correct them 30 years ago, they'd just dig their heels in and say no. I'm the
Yeah.
teacher. But now the kid will be like, yeah, but I just asked Siri and it says right here that uh so you can't do that anymore. The cat's out of the bag. Like so
Yeah.
like but yet some teachers are still doing that. And we have to just get to a place where we understand we got to be kind to ourselves, and we're not supposed to be a Wizard of Oz. There's just a man and a woman behind a curtain.
Yeah.
But
Actually, I being like fairly new myself, I definitely felt the pressure to like be better than Google. You
yeah,
know what I mean? Like
yeah,
as you're
yeah.
going
Well,
through
that's
uni.
wasted energy. Because then it's just like
Yeah.
okay, let's. Then my first question when you found that answer, I'm like, oh, okay. Well, who wrote that? Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
that's important because listen to me.
Yeah.
Like if your Uncle Rick is giving you Spanish advice, and you're like like my Uncle Rick could barely speak English. Like, why would I ask him for advice on Spanish? So it's like they have to understand sometimes. Like just because I popped it in that bar, just because I said it to Hey Siri, like there's
Yeah.
still levels there, and that's education. That's how you educate
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
And
Because one of my buddies said it's like it's pretty much you're trying to model them like how to learn. Like that was
yeah,
kind of the goal. Like you're not really trying to like be this, oh, you will know everything once you're done with me. It's like I'm going to model how to find your own path kind of for you, which I'm assuming like you've embodied that with trying to take on comedy and doing an alternate route of some sort. So like you're putting yourself in the beginner mindset. And usually if you aren't comfortable with yourself, like you won't do that. That's kind of what I try to
well,
instill a little bit anyway in
yeah.
my
And
kids.
even with
So
the kids, I'm just
yeah.
transparent. Like if they ask me a
Mhm.
question, I'm like, you know what? That's a great question.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't
I'm
know
like, I
the
have no
answer right
idea.
now either, but we're gonna figure it out.
Yeah.
I said right now we gotta do this, but put a pin in that, write it down.
Yeah.
Let's let's chat about it as soon as you get
Or
in.
let's figure it out together right now. Like let's put our heads
Exactly, you
together and
can
try to
start, and if
figure out
you
an
don't have
answer to
anything
yeah.
else, then that becomes the
Yeah.
lesson. And you
Yeah.
can, there's a good TED talk, a guy named Ken Robinson, I believe his name is Ken Robinson, but it's called "Schools Are Killing Curiosity," and it's
Mhm.
just all about how like we need this curiosity based education. And when we get into the weeds with standardized testing, what has to be done at what time, you get away
Mhm.
from that sometimes because it's not being led by students' curiosity, it's being led by what a state test is telling you to do.
Well, yeah, and I saw this quote. It was like, "Don't let school get in the way of your education." And I
Right?
was like,
That's a great,
"That."
that's, but that's what it is. Like, we get in our own ways sometimes. And that's
Yeah.
like, yeah, that becomes the lesson. I like to do a thing in my Latin classes every year where I have them do TED Talks. And
Mm.
and and whenever I do a project, I try to give as few instructions as possible,
Yeah.
because I want them. So the only thing I say to them is they have to find something that they're interested in within the Greco-Roman or linguistical world, and something that one of their friends who doesn't take Latin wouldn't think or would have something misunderstood, and then their
Mhm.
job is in 3 to 5 minutes be able to explain to them why that's not the case or
It's a
enlighten
great
them
idea,
about
actually.
something that it is. And it's really cool to see what they pick because that's where they all took the class for a reason. And so
Mhm.
sometimes they don't get to pursue when they pick a class. Sometimes they have an idea of what they think the class is. They use the little blurb in the
Yeah.
description, but I want to make sure I'm giving them an opportunity where they get to take some ownership over what we learn or what they focus on. And so that's kind of like what teachers need. Teachers need a passion project. Like some schools do a
Well,
really
yeah.
good job of like genius hour.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I even one thing I've noticed is that, especially with my very high academic kids, the idea of being creative is, like, terrifying. Like,
Mm.
they don't have this, like, creative muscle at all. So, whenever I've tried to give those kind of more open-ended projects, they're like, "But what do I do next?"
Yeah,
I'm
what
like,
I
"What
do
do you
next.
think?"
Yeah.
They're like, "Well, like, how do I get a high mark?" I'm like, "I don't like, what do you know? Like, what do you think? Like, where are you going here?" And, like, I'm trying to
Pin
let
and
them unravel, but it's like they keep kinda correcting themselves back into the middle lane, and I'm like, "No, like, take this where you want. Like, it doesn't need to be this exact. We can talk about the rubric later. That's not a big deal. Like, let's look
And
at
that's it. They get
how
into
do
the
you
weeds, like,
actually
how do I
channel
get
it.
the grade? How do I get the A? How do
Yeah,
I get a 92?
yeah,
And it's like that. I don't have those I refuse to have those conversations. I'll give them
yeah.
a rubric and whatever, but again, that
Yes, yeah.
rubric. Here's the other thing. That rubric, whatever, smoke and mirrors, because you can use whatever ambiguous language you want, so that you can skew it to whatever you want. Because at the end of the
Yes,
day, you got to trust that. You got to trust the process. You got to trust what's happening.
yeah.
I will say this cool. If you ever look at a TED Ed, the TED Ed has a thing where they do TED Ed clubs. And
Hmm.
what was cool on what you were just saying is I started a TED Ed club and they had sent me a packet. And it was like this 13 lesson packet or 13 weeks to a TED talk. And it was all of the things to help them figure out what they were going to look at. Some of it was
Hmm.
mind mapping, some of them figure out and it gave them like this kind of graphic organizers and questions to
Hmm.
think about. And it was kind of cool because it helped some of the kids that needed
That
maybe
is
a little
cool.
bit more concreteness.
Like the
Um,
process anyway of
it
getting
gave
to
them,
it.
yeah, it
Yeah.
still was open ended, but it
Hmm.
at least gave them those steps, so to speak.
Hmm.
Or but some of the kids they just want the A. They're just trying to get to the A and whatever it means. And
Which is also fair. Like, I'm never demeaning of like, you know what? If you don't like social, that's fine. Like, you just want to kind of get through, get a good grade, move on with your life. That's totally fair.
yeah,
But even in like your like kind of like you're still teaching full time. Is that correct?
so yeah,
Like you were on
I did
sabbatical
take a
there, but
sabbatical when I was studying autism, and it ends. I
oh, okay.
actually go back in 2 weeks.
Okay, so how are you feeling about
That's a good question. Uh,
that?
I'm excited about going back. Because
Mhm,
I hadn't been teaching high school Latin for a couple of years because right
mhm,
before the pandemic, I switched to being like a tech coach where we were getting like Chromebooks for all the kids. We were getting a new
yeah,
learning management system, so they asked me to help the faculty kind of get ready for that. And then COVID happened, and they said, "Well, we definitely need you to stay in this role now because we need all we're glad we did that 2 years in advance because had they not done that I couldn't imagine how we would have done COVID without having that system and having
mhm,
those Chromebooks." So then I stayed on and I just helped everybody figure out what tools they could use to do what they were doing physical and how do I
mhm,
convert that into virtual.
mhm,
Uh, and that was exciting. And that was something I didn't plan on ever doing. And it was so rewarding helping other teachers like I was joking that it was like helping the Flintstones meet the Jetsons. Like it was like really cool to kind of help them kind of figure that out. And
mhm,
I actually started a student club during the pandemic for kids that were like, "You're really good, like tech wise." And I put a message out on the video out of me saying, "Hey, are you the one who helps your neighbors program their DVR? Have you helped your grandparents set their iPhone up? Like, do you have extra time and would love to do that for your fellow students and teachers?" And we created something called the Tech Pack. And we called it TPAC, which was Technology to Promote Academic Collaboration. And it was just a group of kids who had free time, and we would have Google Meet going all day. And it was the same code. It was like TPAC, TPAC. And if any kid, so the goal was for the teachers not to have to get stressed out about the kids doing these weapons of mass confusion. Oh, I can't sign in. Oh, I can't access this.
yeah,
Oh, and so all the teacher would say, well, okay, go to TPAC, sign out. I got to keep teaching. The show's got to go
mhm,
on. Go get the help you need over here. Because I didn't want
yep,
them to have to be the tech experts. They're the content
yes,
experts. So
yeah,
I was on it all day, and then a kid or two kids or three kids, depending on the time, were sitting there with me, and they could go in a breakout room if it was something a little bit more elaborate, or we could help them, or teachers started popping in. Hey, can kids do this on a Chromebook? And then I would put the lesson in from the teacher end. The kid would go on his Chromebook. I had like a fake classroom set up within the system. We would
mhm,
try it out, we would test it, and then we would report back to them. And so
yeah,
we helped resolve 300 help tickets the first 8 months we did it the first year. And then other people started asking us for stuff. Like the school wanted a new digital map. The nurses had to figure out how to keep track of teachers who went out on COVID and if
mm,
when they could come back. So we created this system using like a Google form that would kick out to every teacher when they went out. and they would like report their temperature, and then it would go to the spreadsheet that the nurse would look
Mhm.
at, and we had a kid conditionally format it so it would be red or green to be like, nope, still quarantining, or now good to go, and to make it easier on the nurse. So she just had to click the shortcut to the thing, and she would see it. And we used like the Remind app so that it would send it out intuitively
Yeah.
every day. Like we did all of that so that the nurses didn't have to do all of that. So we were such a
Yeah.
resource, and these kids were great. They were just like killing it. And I wasn't like, it was running itself. I was just
Mhm.
there. They taught me a ton of stuff about technology. And that was really cool for me because that was a thing about
Mhm.
talk about imposter syndrome. I would tell them, I'm like, I don't know about this technology stuff. Like I know enough from trial, and the kids were teaching each other. They were teaching me how to code. I learned how to use HTML. I learned how, so
No, I only chuckled there about a minute ago because like my experience with technology with education is not good. My wife would say I'm a very like tame person. Like I don't get mad very easily. But when it
yeah,
comes to technology that's not working, I'm like, what? I'm
yeah.
like,
Well,
it is what triggers
what a
me so
frustration
hard.
it is, it's for everybody.
It's the most frustrating thing ever.
Well, that's the other
But
thing. Like, there's an expectation if you're younger, you're supposed to know it. Like,
yeah, I'm like,
there's this like
no idea.
digital divide, but it's not. That's not the case. Not every young person comes out knowing how to use technology, and so that was the other thing because the older teachers were just expecting the students to be able to do it because of their age, and that's also a misnomer.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's
yeah,
all
because I like my wife's family's always like, Luke, can you set up the switch on the screen? I'm like, I can do that. I know where the HDMI port is, and I'm like walking around like, oh yeah, I killed it. But as for anything in my, and I've had a few times, I don't know who or I don't know, but I think people have been unplugging my little cord that goes from my screen to my computer, and I'll get like all frantic in the morning just to realize that I just need to plug one thing back in. And I'm like, oh.
right. And it's always like, yeah, it's always at the wrong time. It's like when you're trying to get through to something, but that's it. And I noticed that with parenting stuff. Like I was never handy, like building stuff. I was so nervous about the car seat because I had heard it was so hard to put
Yeah.
in, and
It's like weird
honestly,
fears that you have.
oh my god! And then I became so good at it. I was the one in the family whenever somebody else was taking them somewhere and we needed to put it in their car. Like I could get it was so easy. But again, it's the fear of the
Yeah.
unknown. The minute you immerse yourself in it for a second, um,
Well, I remember when I landed my first teaching gig, I my biggest fear, because after my practicum, toward the end of it, I had my few moments of like feeling the sweat go down my back, and I kind of had a decent grounding of like being a bit more comfortable.
yeah.
My biggest stressor was figuring out how to use the printer. I was like, this thing looks so terrifying. Like, I don't know how to navigate this massive machine,
So
and
many
ended up
options.
being it ended up being like, I mean, ours breaks here all the time. We've like boards the whole thing,
Yeah,
but
they're actually
we
supposed to do that. That's every school ever. Like it's like the roads. Like I'm serious. How could the Romans build roads 2,000 years ago, and we can't
still
have
standing.
roads that
Yeah.
last longer than a year? Like I think it's built in there. Like we don't want them to be too good because then how do we keep making money? Um,
Yeah, I need those jobs next summer, man.
yeah. So, but yeah, it's funny. It's funny how the things we let, like the amygdala gets so big in our brain, and we can't. That fear center just takes over. It's like
Yeah.
when you move. I mean, when I move desks around in my classroom. They come in, they're like, "There's a test," or like, "Actually, something's different." Like, what's, we all have that. So it's like those fears. I mean, even when we talked about my daughter, and oh wait, she's autistic. Like
Yeah.
there's always going to be something that as humans triggers us, and that and I think what I've realized is once I slow down and just give myself a second, whether it's a car seat, whether it's a printer, whether it's a
Mhm.
diagnosis, it helped me to kind of just slow down, take a breath, and then okay, let's just reassess. It's like anything. It's like all right, it's like that kid has a question I didn't think about. All right, well let's just slow it down. Let's stop, pause what we're doing, and let's explore that for a minute. And when you can be more flexible like that, I think that's cool because that's what I want. That's what I want the kids to see from me, that I'm listening to them, and then that they have some ownership. And that's the same thing with comedy. It's funny. That's why I think even though I've only been doing comedies for such a short amount of time, the skills are transferable. And that's what we want out of like being in an environment. You want whatever you're going to do, you want those skills. That's
Being
why I think,
adaptable.
yeah, like I mean, because in comedy, it's supposed to sound like an off the cuff conversation. Like the most
Yeah.
ideal thing is that you start by talking to the audience. They say something that then takes you on the where we're going.
Yeah.
But really, if you're a good comedian, it's just a flow chart. So the minute they say something, I have a flow chart that's already going where I planned on us to go. But you don't. But it doesn't come off that way. And so I think a good teacher does that. A good teacher thinks about, it's like a chess game. Where could these ways go? And ultimately, at the end of the day, we want it to end up here. We know where we want to end. I know where I'm going to end my set. Always know where I'm going to end my set. But how I started in the middle, we find that together. And so
Yeah.
that's what I think, teaching in
Well, that's
comedy.
kind of like lesson planning, or
That's
just
it.
like
It's just
when you
yeah,
write a
it's just
lesson
it's
plan
just yep.
versus, well, even for example, for today, like I made a list of things I kind of wanted to chat with you about, but then I touched on two of them. But like that's fine. Like you're kind of just figuring it out as you
Yeah,
go,
yeah,
and it's like that's
you take the most
yeah,
important thing, and you're like, okay,
yeah,
this is definitely going to happen,
yeah,
and whatever. And once you can give up that control a little bit too, and you're like,
hmm
okay, it is what it is. I have
hmm
tomorrow. We can course correct and do all of that. That's why I don't worry about mapping out my whole year.
yeah.
Um,
Yes, nothing in this business is fatal. That's my
nice.
favorite
Yeah,
quote about education. Is like we can always come back to it tomorrow.
yeah.
Like it's not that deep. But I just got a couple more things to ask you,
Please.
Jay. Now that you're kind of going toward the end of your sabbatical and going back in, are you like nervous at all, or curious to see maybe like how your students or colleagues potentially change in the way they kind of interact with you now that you're on? They don't want to be content on stage for you,
Yeah,
but
exactly. Yeah, put that in your little skits. Yeah, that's like the number one thing now. Yeah, what's interesting? Last night at the show I was at, I had a former student there and her mom, and then another. Now that I knew,
Mhm.
they just right before I got upstage, they're like, "Oh, you tutored Jordan? She's right there," or like. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see that. But
Mhm.
I think when I'm in the classroom, I'm all business, so I feel like I'm going to be doing a lot of deflecting and a lot of like, oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Right now we're trying to work on this, but I, I'm sure there's going to be kids talking about stuff or like my social media stuff.
Yeah.
I'm really curious, but it's been out there already.
Mhm.
I had a TikTok clip go like 8.1 million or something, and
Okay.
it took my
What was the
daughter.
clip?
It was a clip about how I do these projects in my Spanish class, but really it was just the kids planning my vacation for me. Uh, and it was true. Like it was like in part it was comedy, but it was true. Like it is a project I do. I've been doing it for
Yeah.
years. I give the kids a budget. And then they get to pick. They have to pick a Spanish speaking country because we're trying to hit all the capitals and countries as part of
Yeah.
the curriculum.
That's
But I also
hilarious,
want
actually, yeah.
I also want them to know what their parents do when they make a vacation. Like, how do you choose, like, where you're gonna stay? How you get into the
Mhm.
airport? Like, hey, here's
Yeah,
$2,000. How long can you go to Puerto Rico for?
yeah, yeah.
And then I would take these trips in the summer, like, and a lot of times I'd learn
Like,
something from the kids. And I
I
was
think
like,
it's
oh,
100%.
let's do that. Or I would take students on trips and we would go to some of these destinations.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was that clip, but I was taking my daughters to a football game because it was like their elementary school. It was their night to go for free and see their
Yeah.
classmates and whatever. Or my daughter was cheerleading with the varsity cheerleaders. So I'm walking around the track and I could hear the kids saying, "That's Mr. Yoder. He's on TikTok." So I think if what I've realized is I've got a lot of street cred now. I got a lot of because I've taken to the digital streets and I'm cool. And it was stuff with teaching, and
The TikTok street cred is too
I, I'm
real.
I'm just proud it was something like positive. You know what I mean? Like it was something because
Yes,
that's
yeah,
you want to even in comedy. I want to be who I am on stage. You know what I mean? I don't want
yeah.
people to have the surprise. Like there's like we had this Danny Tanner. I don't know if you ever watched Full House. but there was this TV show growing up, and it was this wholesome TV dad. But his real stand-up act, he was dirty. He was like the dirtiest son ever. And so you grew up watching him as this TV dad, and then if you ever watched his stand-up, you're like, whoa,
You're like, this is not what I expected.
not what I
Is that the
expected.
Mr. Yoder
Yeah.
experience? You go to the
So
comedy club and
I
you're like,
don't
oh
want
my.
that. I don't want that to be the same for me. But yeah, I don't do anything I'm not proud of. And that's
Yeah.
different. That's not. I'm not going to talk about. And even if it is something that's like a little darker, a little something, I'm not telling it in the classroom. It's something on stage
Yes.
at a
No.
comedy
Yeah.
club.
Well, it
Or
sounds like you need to have like a really solid boundary there.
yeah.
I
So
think because
I
even
think it's going to
like
be interesting. It's gonna. I think
yeah
it's going to go well. But I think there's going to be some grounded cover. I wondered about like, oh, if a parent like was upset with a grade I gave, would they try to go find something on my social media and like take,
yeah
you
that's
know
a
what I mean?
legitimate like
And I'll be honest, if they want to do that, come at me. I'll leave teaching. Whatever. If you're gonna push me out like that, I'll leave because if I can't be myself and I can't,
yeah
then that's fine. Then you win. You can,
yeah
because like that's where I'm at with it. I'm just like, listen, I'm living my life
hmm
here. I'm
hmm
proud of what I'm doing. If you think I'm something else, then that's that's not going to happen. But that's just me like
hmm
prepping for the worst.
yeah well you're always going worst case scenario and you're like I don't want this to ever be used against me because
Yeah,
like teaching is obviously still the primary like
yep,
career and like
yep.
it's not like you're going to take it less serious
No,
because you're doing other things. It's like no,
no,
if
yeah. There's
anything you're
stuff
probably doing it better now because you're just kind of in a better space and you're actually enjoying it more because it's not all that you're doing, right?
exactly, and
But
I have a handle of that. Yeah,
yeah. So I got one more thing to ask you. It
please.
kind of piggybacks off of the quote I mentioned earlier about the don't let school get in the way of your education. The quote is education is what remains once we forget everything that we learned in school. So when
Yeah.
you enter into your classroom, like what is it that you want your students to take away from their experience with Mr. Yoder that they won't get anywhere else?
What does it mean in Latin? But in terms of like the experience with me in the classroom, I think I want them to experience an adult and a model that they can see for themselves, like someone who, listens, someone who cares about them. I want them to learn empathy. And so, because we don't remember what we say, but we remember how we felt. Remember the way
Mhm,
someone made us feel. And so I just listen to the tuning fork inside me. And like I just let that guide everything I do because it tells me when I'm walking a line. It tells me when I'm going down a path that maybe I shouldn't go. I think that we all have that in us. We know when we're
mhm,
walking a righteous path and when we're trying to like get away with something. And so I want them to know I'm a human, and this is what humans look like. This is how they deal with emotions. Sometimes they make mistakes,
mhm,
and then they have to apologize. The biggest thing is if I ever make a mistake or if I say something or whatever that I apologize, and they see me
mhm,
apologize. Because all you can do as a human is fall on the sword, and people are so willing to give you another opportunity to succeed.
mhm,
And so I hope they learn that they can make mistakes and that they can be a human. And it's not, we're not about perfection. And that, because I struggle with that. Like, I want to be perfect. That's yesterday. I was having a bad day.
yeah,
Had a terrible day yesterday. The only thing that got me out of it was a Tony Robbins clip I saw last night where there was a kid and he had said that he hated himself. And Tony Robbins came up to him and he's like, "Why do you hate yourself? Is it your red shoes? Because they're effing red." And then the kid started smiling. He's like, "Don't you do that. Don't you dare crack that smile because then you're going to want to be here. You're going to want to be here longer." And he was like playing with that emotion of
yeah,
like, he's like, "Listen, I love that you have a high standard for yourself, but that's
yeah,
perfection, you know?" And
yeah,
people overestimate what they can do in a year and they underestimate what they can do in 10 to 20 years. He's like, so
yeah.
give yourself time, give yourself
That's
grace,
so true.
and that's all I would want for my students. Like they're going to put so much pressure on what they can do in that academic year that if I
Mhm,
can get them to see big picture, if I can get them to see a lifetime and how this is just a drop in the bucket, so that 91.5 that you wished was a 92 in the grand
yeah,
scheme of things, that doesn't matter.
it's
You
not
know,
that deep.
it's not fatal, right? Let's say
Yeah,
so it's like if I can get them to just be a human and understand what it means to be a human, I took a course in college that I still rave about. It was a course every freshman had to take called CIE, Common Intellectual Experience, and it only had three
Hmm.
questions. You read all literature from all genres and times, and you had three questions: what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be good? And what is our role in the universe? And so, according to each text, you had to have a discussion about what that author would have said to those things, whether it was Mein Kampf and Adolf Hitler to,
Yeah.
the Epic of Gilgamesh and Beowulf. Like what did those things mean? And so I think I want them to, you know, have my own version of what I think it means to be good and a human, and follow that tuning fork.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
This was great.